Welcome back. We're now going to speak about global health and aging, implications for health and participation. This course will broaden your minds about who older adults are. We will learn about different challenges older adults face specific to aging, but we will also explore the well elderly population who are active, engaged individuals participating in the community. I hope to broaden your perspective on older adults and address any biases you may have. Demographics of aging. The population of older adults is increasing rapidly around the world. Reductions in infant mortality are causing the increase in the older adult population, reductions in death from infectious disease, and improved healthcare. All are resulting in the population of older adults to rapidly increase. Definitions of old age and the experience of aging have changed over time as societies have changed. Between 2015 and 2050, the proportion of the world's population over 60 years old will nearly double from 12% to 22%. By 2060, almost a quarter of the US population will be 65 years or older. The history of aging. So life expectancy. In early civilizations, life expectancy was 30 years old. There was an extremely high infant mortality rate. Life expectancy increased to age 40 until about 6000 BCE. In ancient Greece, Rome, and Egypt, men who reached the age of 25 could expect to live to about 48 or so. And in the Middle Ages, life expectancy was roughly 33 to 35 years old. Throughout these times, as it is true in modern days, efforts to prolong life were evident. These efforts were recorded in the Old Testament in Greek, Indian, and Celtic myths. Long life was something to be sought, although the search for the fountain of youth suggests that although long life was valued, old age was not. Life expectancy continued. So by the end of the Renaissance, it was increasingly common to find individuals living to age 70. At the beginning of the 20th century, average life expectancy was between 45 to 49 years old. In the United States in 2010, life expectancy was 81 years for white women, 78 years old for Black women, 76 for white men, and 62 for Black men. With what you've learned in your DEI and justice course, I want you to think about how systematic racism impacts life expectancy. What resources or opportunities have been available to white individuals versus Black individuals? We will continue to explore this throughout this course. I find this map fascinating. I want you in your spare time just to take a look and, look around the world at what the current life expectancy is, male versus female. I think it just is interesting to see what it looks like in different parts of the world. The impacts of economic circumstances and gender throughout history. Economic circumstances have had an effect on longevity, with the wealthy surviving the longest. And like I started to say, think about the opportunities and the resources and all the care that they have available to them when they have the money available to them to spend on it. Women were labeled as old at a younger age, but actually have always lived longer as a population. Women are more likely to live in poverty, and societal roles actually contributed to higher satisfaction with aging. When you think about what are the typical, in quotes, roles women play in society, caregiving, and those roles continuing as their children have children. So a question for you all as the class. The elements that contribute to the wealthy living the longest are similar to those that persist today: access to adequate diet, healthcare, and information. What are your thoughts on this? How does this impact the way we think about our patients? Think about this from a diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice perspective. There are also ways in which women have aged more satisfactory than men, primarily because of their historical role and responsibility for household chores and for grandparenting activities, like I mentioned before. These defined roles continued women's earlier activities, minimizing the challenge of the transition to older age. I want you to reflect on everything I've said so far. So, different attitudes, roles, and cohort effects throughout history and its impact on aging. So, different attitudes, ambiguity is, are we looking at older adults as wise and revered or foolish and burdensome? Are we looking at their roles? For example, in an agrarian society, if you've done your reading, you can look back at this as well in your textbook. Older adults did better typically in those types of societies because they were seen as a vital part of the culture, because they were teaching the younger cohorts how to care for the land and how to fulfill the roles that they were now giving up. Thinking about different cohort effects. So, did anyone read the characteristics of the different generational cohorts and find it fascinating? Again, how does this impact how we think about our patients and we relate to them? Our patients have all different generational experiences. What different historical events have occurred during their lifetime that have affected their attitudes, their opinions, their views on the world, and different roles they play, and what expectations they might have coming into a healthcare model or expectations of life in general? Here's a chart taken from the text about the different characteristics of the cohorts in the United States. I'm not going to read all of these details out, and you by no means need to memorize this for any kind of test question. But I do want you to take the time and look at the different dates of when people were born. Think about what's happened in history during those years. What have these people lived through? And why might this make them display some of these core life values or act a certain way when they're in therapy with you? So think about people you know in different cohorts. Do they display these traits that are listed here? What world events occurred during their lifetime? At what age? How does this shape people? Think about your cohort. What traits do you display? What have you lived through? I think it's, a lighter version of thinking about this, but I had an interesting discussion a few years ago with someone, and I love to bring it up during this lecture about Harry Potter. I am one of those people. I grew up reading Harry Potter. I would get the book and I would read it within 2 days. I now have my sons reading Harry Potter. But it's interesting when you think about that book and that series and how that impacted how people my age think about aging and how they think about their role in their life in the world. We are definitely categorized as independent thinkers, sometimes going against authority and questioning things. Again, a very light version and very minimal thing that I've lived through, but I thought it was an interesting take on thinking about what cohorts might display. Defining old age. So we must differentiate from being old and aging. Aging occurs throughout life. The second you are born, you begin to age. Old age is often defined in the context of life expectancy. So that's why we opened up this lecture with that. Through the Middle Ages, life expectancy was only 30 to 35, remember. In modern times, life expectancy has increased to the late 70s, early 80s. So now they define old age in 3 different categories. There's the young old, that is 55 years to 75 years old, middle old, which is 76 to 85, and oldest old, which is over 85. So it's always interesting to me when people say, when I have students come to me and they might say, I don't think I want to work with older adults. I definitely want to work in phys diz. I kind of pause and I say, you realize working in phys diz is primarily working with adults in general. You might be working with the young old, the middle old, the oldest old. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be working in a nursing home. But if you're working in any hospital setting other than a specifically pediatric hospital, if you're working in any kind of acute rehab or outpatient rehab, you're going to be working with older adults. they might be in that, middle age category. However, you will definitely have a mix of people. So social and behavioral determinants of health and aging. What are we looking for when we're talking about risk factor screening? Individual characteristics and experience do impact the way that people age. Low education, poverty, so thinking of someone's socioeconomic status, food insecurity, depression, tobacco use, alcohol abuse, low physical activity, lack of a partner, which I always think is interesting, but they relate that in the text to social connections, genetics, personality traits, adaptability and emotional regulation, coping skills, and beliefs and expectations. How optimistic is that person? What do they believe the rest of life has to hold for them? Impact of gender. So there are differences in life expectancy that I said earlier. Women tend to live longer. And it's actually pretty shocking. Typically, when you go into a nursing home, again, typically, but very typically, you see mostly older women are in the nursing home, not as many older men. Differential rates of disease and disability. Women are more likely to be frail or disabled in later life. Differences in career and work trajectories. Women are more likely to live in poverty, and that often occurs because they maybe took on traditionally the caretaker role within the family, and maybe their partner was the one who was working. And if they lost their partner, they might have lost any of the financial support that the partner provided. Differences in roles and expectations. Men are typically more likely to struggle with the absence of work role when they retire or when they, just stop working because of maybe some type of disability that's come with aging, or just something of a natural part of aging that they no longer work. Thinking about older adults' physical environment. So the type of community, whether it's urban, rural, or suburban, really does impact the way that someone ages. Thinking about the rural community, typically offers a strong social support because people are living in, close-knit communities in those type of areas. However, difficult access to services because there's not as many doctors' offices, hospitals, rehab centers within very rural areas. Thankfully, the silver lining of COVID has been definitely telehealth and how many more people can now receive services because of the rapid advances that COVID caused us to make with getting people services that can't come into a facility. In the urban type of community, tends to be lower socioeconomic status, but closer to resources and transportation. So just thinking about Manhattan, where you all are right now, think about how much access people have to all the resources in the city. So think about doctor's offices, outpatient therapies, even community centers, or, food kitchens, different types of supports that people in rural areas just don't have as much access to, as well as transportation access. There's a lot more public transportation with the trains, cabs, Ubers, everything that the city now has available. And then there's the suburbs, which tends to be the higher socioeconomic status, but some difficulty with transportation. It's just not as frequent that you're having, definitely a train station in your town in the suburbs. That doesn't always happen by any means. Same thing with if you think about Ubers, there might be one Uber in someone's town, where in the city, there's an Uber every step you take. And then thinking of place of residence, where is that person aging? Are they aging in place? Are they migrating from somewhere else and now aging in a completely different place than they were used to? Are they homeless? Or are they institutionalized? Are there someone who's living in a nursing home? And then what are the characteristics of the neighborhood? Think about the transportation, like I said, that's available, as well as the safety. Does that person feel safe living in that environment? Are they going to leave their home to go to the doctor if they don't feel safe leaving, because of something that's right outside their door? So a question for the class: what is the importance of aging in place? And we'll have an entire lecture next semester about aging in place, but I want you to think about it. Why would someone want to age in place where they are, meaning with whatever kind of home they're already living in, whether that's a house, an apartment, a community home, aging in place? Aging in place helps people maintain independence typically because they're very familiar with their environment. So, I think about my grandmas and they're very independent within their own environments. But if you take them out of there and you put them in somewhere they're not familiar, they would have a lot more trouble. Aging in place allows people to retain social support from family and friends. Maybe they live with family or they have a very, close neighbor that they live next to. An example I always give is of one of my grandmas. She lived in an apartment building, and her and like three other women would do one food shop for the week and they would all share the groceries. So they'd buy like one big chicken and they'd all take a part of the chicken. They didn't need a whole chicken themselves and they felt like it would go to waste and be a waste of money. So they all split their food up. That's an example of a social support and a reason that my grandma did really well aging in place. Definitely the security of familiarity. Like I said, if someone is familiar with their environment, it's a lot safer for them to live there. And autonomy. Someone has way more control over living in their own space versus someone who's now living in some type of institution. Although aging in place is typically considered to be positive, for some elders, it is not optimal because, particularly in different economic settings and environments, they might not be able to sell their homes if they reach a certain point. They may be not able to clean out their homes, and that can impact their ability to sell their home. So it's not always the best thing to stay aging in place for an extended period of time with no intention to move from there. When elders choose not to age in place or cannot for different health reasons, economics, or other factors, careful consideration must be given to supporting a successful transition. And this is definitely somewhere that OTs come into play. It's an interdisciplinary approach. I've worked very closely with social workers, with physical therapists, and of course, other OTs, and to ensure a safe, smooth transition from someone who might be going from living in their home to now going to living in an assisted living facility or living in a nursing home. Sociocultural environments. So thinking about societal attitudes that may lead to ageism. Ageism is a type of bias. Thinking about what do people see when they look at an older adult? What are their expectations? What are they assuming about someone without even knowing what their situation is? Different cultural beliefs and values about aging. And then public policy. Financial supports. Does someone have a pension, which is a government-sponsored support, such as or a government-sponsored support, such as Social Security? Do people have that available to them? Access to care. So, what are their expectations of family versus expectations of the government? Who do they think should be helping, help them get access to different resources? And financing care. You think about universal health care and all the debates that are about that in government. Payment for home or institutional services, and expectations of family members. If a family member is working full time, how does an older adult expect them to care for them full time as well? Is the family member expected to give up their job and their roles in their life? Two important population trends that are already evident and will be far more pronounced as time goes on. The absolute number and percentage of elders worldwide is increasing, like I said earlier. The change in demographic structure will result in more of a rectangular population structure. Now, what I mean by that is that demographers have typically in history used an image of a triangle or a pyramid to describe the world's population. A large group of young people at the bottom of the pyramid or the triangle, and progressively fewer people in each succeeding generation, with the smallest number of very old people at the top. The United States version of the pyramid will become much more rectangular, according to the census data analysis by the Pew Research Center. That's not just because baby boomers, people who were born between 1946 and 1964 are reaching retirement age in large numbers, but also because Americans in general are both having fewer children and are living longer. So all of these things combined is creating more of a rectangular image of the population. So a question for you all. What is meant by successful aging? Why is this label controversial? And why might positive aging be a more helpful model? This was in your reading. Successful aging is outside of voluntary control. Even with strenuous health promotion efforts, avoiding disease and maintaining function are not always within an individual's power. Sometimes it's just not possible. However, individuals with various kinds of disability or dysfunction can absolutely lead very satisfying lives. So we think more of positive aging. This incorporates ideas of successful aging, aging well, and optimal aging. It includes both objective and subjective factors. So examples of objective factors are the number of chronic conditions the person might have and their ability to complete ADLs. Examples of subjective factors include satisfaction with current activities and sense of social support. So OT's contributions to positive aging. We, of course, focus on the centrality of meaningful occupation. You learn this throughout your entire first year in this program, how crucial it is for individuals to be able to, in some way, perform and have access to their meaningful occupations. And supporting function that allows for meaningful occupation. It might not look the same as someone ages. That playing, for example, in that top picture, playing ping pong might not look the same as you age. But if that's an important occupation for an individual, it is OT's role on the team to help that individual have access to that occupation. Active aging, the 8 dimensions of wellness. So active aging promotes the vision of all individuals, regardless of age, socioeconomic status, or health, fully engaging in life within all 8 dimensions of wellness. We're going to go through all the different dimensions of wellness. There's the physical dimension, which is caring for your body to stay healthy now and in the future. There's the intellectual dimension, which is growing intellectually, right? Challenging yourself, knowing what you don't know yet and exploring that. There's the emotional dimension, which is understanding and respecting your own feelings, your values, and your attitudes, as well as others, and appreciating the differences that others have from you. And the social dimension, maintaining healthy relationships, enjoying being with other people, having intimate relationships, having friendships, having a sense of community. So just on this slide, looking at those 4 dimensions of wellness, they directly relate to why we are simultaneously covering and integrating concepts related to physical and psychological health in our curriculum. In this course, we'll look at these dimensions as they specifically relate to older adults. The next 4 dimensions of wellness, the spiritual dimension, the vocational dimension, financial, and environmental dimensions. I'll allow you to read these on your own, but make sure you have a good understanding of what this is for each individual. This is a very powerful video. Let's end ageism. Please watch this in its entirety and come prepared to reflect and challenge your own biases during this course.